A little while back, when the trailer for the Mortal Kombat reboot first dropped, I made a video about how you might be able to ruin that movie.
First learned about this 7 years ago, on a mission in Brazil to capture a wanted fugitive.
Well, the film is out now, and I'll get right to the point. While it's not a total dumpster fire, there's something that stands out to me more egregiously than any of the film's numerous sins. This is how Mortal Kombat's writing defangs its fight scenes. Before I get too critical, I really need to acknowledge that it's really hard to make movies. And even though I'm about to rant about some problems that I have with it, I also want to say that there's a lot to love here. It's got beautiful cinematography, some spectacular costumes, and fantastic fight choreo. Seriously. While my point is a critical one, this film is the product of a lot of people working really hard for a really long time. And finishing a film like this with the time and budget they had is in itself miraculous. Okay, I had to get that off my chest. Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung met at Chinese opera school. Chinese opera has at least one very distinct quality which differs from Western opera, and that's its particular propensity for hybrid fight dancing. By that, I mean the fighting in these productions is dancing, and it's super cool to watch, all the more so because it's utilized so well as a storytelling device. You can see this philosophy on display in Jackie's movies. The fights are very rarely an end unto themselves. They tell us something about the characters or they move the story forward. Since the fight sequences are pulling their narrative weight, so to speak, dialogue still feels unhurried. It doesn't have to pick up any extra responsibilities or pull double duty because the story didn't just stop every time someone got into a fight. Just look at The Legend of Drunken Master. In the final battle at the end, Chan echoes the moves he used in this scene from earlier in the film and shows through the choreography his character's journey from a gifted martial artist with no self-control to a prudent fighter who knows when to rein his impulses in. Mortal Kombat, however, has a big pacing problem. Whenever we meet a character, they immediately take up the mantle of dumping exposition anytime they're not fighting. Jax explains the difference between a tattoo and a birthmark. Sonya's got her QAnon conspiracy board in her basement. Liu Kang has a backstory, but like zero emotional depth, while Raiden at least is passive-aggressive, I guess, as he godsplains Cole's family tree. The writing is preoccupied with telling us what is happening because the action scenes aren't sufficiently coded with enough information to show it to us. Instead of getting to be characters on their own, they're basically just feeding us answers to a pop quiz. This is, of course, further exacerbated by the fact that the story is actually not about the Mortal Kombat tournament at all, because that's not actually even in this movie. The plot revolves around getting everyone mad enough to turn into superheroes so that they can eventually fight in a clandestine martial arts tournament. They all have to discover their arcanas, which are essentially their superpowers, and since that's what the second act of the film is all about anyway, the best justification for fighting we really get for a good stretch of the film is just training montage. The tournament is just a MacGuffin here. Because of all this, the film just kind of springs random fights on us willy-nilly. The lizard, we must assume to be Reptile, attacks, and Cole and Sonya free Kano to help them fight it. But the fight itself is pretty pointless. Sonya's already given Cole the rundown of the tournament on her kooky corkboard, so Reptile's attack doesn't reveal any new information to us. And in the very next scene, Sonya hires Kano to help them find Raiden's temple anyway, so violence good, I guess? Fast forward like 5 minutes, and Sonya and Kano scuffle in the desert, and the only change that occurs in the story due to this fight is that Kano doesn't have the GPS anymore. But consider this alternate structure. If Kano had broken free in Sonya's 4chan sex dungeon and he and Sonya fought there, then we would have established their rivalry through that fight. Then, rather than explaining the whole tournament to Cole with pictures on a corkboard, wouldn't a near-death mauling by an alien lizard be sufficient enough information to convince Cole that there's at least something wrong here, and at most, that the world needs saving? Over and over, the dialogue renders the fights redundant, so no matter how good they are, and they are good, they remain largely unmemorable because they essentially press pause on the whole narrative. We know that we bought into this experience to see these characters fight, but Mortal Kombat's story structure keeps trying to convince us that they're not actually the point. And then, after all of this, I still felt like a lot of the action fell flat, and I think that I know why. In my opinion, Mortal Kombat's biggest problem is that, on a script level, it doesn't take advantage of the potential of its own fight scenes to pull their weight in storytelling. There's already a rich history of filmmakers who have been doing this for decades, after all. So, since I've already taken up a ton of your time picking at someone else's hard work without offering much in return, I decided to try and take a swing at it myself.
What are you working on?
I'm engaging in carpentry.
Nice.
Hey, is that a rain you got there?
Bang, actually.
Bang sucks.
Is that Rain Carnival candy? The flavor alternative to Bang cotton candy?
Yeah, it is.
It is better.
Wow, still here? Cool. Don't judge me too harshly in the comments. Or do. That might be more fun. Remember how I said that Jackie Chan started out in the Chinese opera? Well, it turns out that works out to his advantage, because what makes something fun to watch is kind of the exact opposite of being an effective fighter. Cole is an MMA fighter, and Evan is an active duty member of the Army Special Forces. They both know how to handle themselves, but it only took a few moves to realize that we had to reprogram all of their good habits so that what they were doing would show up well on screen. But why is that? Well, a fast, effective jab just doesn't really read as well as a Harrison Ford right hook. In a real fight, you minimize your tells and you try to be fast and unreadable, but in a movie, we need to see everything to understand it. If you want a fight to feel visceral, you have to be able to see what's going on. Additionally, if you're fighting for the screen, you have to make all of these moves look convincing to a fixed point in space, the camera lens. Every time it moves, your frame of reference changes and you have to sell the choreography on a completely different plane. We wanted to use the environment a lot, so the scene would stay dynamic and interesting, but instead of keeping the camera wide to show what was happening clearly, my instinct was always to move it closer to their faces, which makes it harder to keep a good read on the environment. I also constantly had to fight my instinct to try and shake the camera around to help them out. Even though Gareth Evans and Mike Flannery use this to great effect in their films, it can very easily just get gross and cheesy. Then, after you've puzzled all of this stuff out and captured it the best that you can under whatever time and budget constraints you're beholden to, the final product still has to be edited. Don't get me wrong here, quick cutting isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's useful in controlling the rhythm and energy of an action scene and can look really cool. But if I'm having a hard time understanding what's happening because of the cutting, that's a problem. We made a few errors that meant I had to cut on a few hits, like on the impact, but we mostly tried to make sure you did see the impact and the reaction to each hit before shifting your viewpoint. We didn't want to take you out of it by cutting you off halfway through a thought. It's not always the speed of the cuts that can be distracting either. If our point of view shifts too much from one shot to the next, it can be disorienting, which is not really what we wanted here. To get around all this, we tried to carefully plan every cut in the sequence beforehand, and then only shoot coverage, which is basically a term for having multiple angles of the same action, when we felt it was necessary. The last thing that was important to us in this was that the fight scene told a story. We couched the scene in hammy dialogue,
I'm engaging in carpentry.
which in the end we had to dub because reasons. And we wanted to show that the fight had changed something, even if it was dumb. Beyond Colt's conversion to the superior energy drink, the moment-to-moment of the fight told a story as well. Colt picking up the hammer signified his advantage at that stage of the fight. Then him hitting the bar and it ringing out gave us a moment to catch our collective breath and reset for the final sequence. Finally, Colt's losing the hammer showed us that Evan had gained the upper hand. And even though it made camera placement much more challenging, we used the playground equipment to add as much visual excitement as we knew how to do, which was especially nice since we're rank amateurs at fight choreography. Basically, we did everything we could think of with our limited time and resources to not just play act violence, but to use it as a method of storytelling. In the end, screen fighting is not real fighting. It's Chinese opera, it's dancing. Good fight scenes have rhythms, small ones like chunks of punch, punch, block, break, and also the larger flow of the fight itself. But even if those rhythms are working, you can't divorce them from the pacing of the movie as a whole. If the action scenes feel divorced from the rest of the film, it can really screw up the way the whole thing feels to watch. I knew, like everyone else in the world, that Mortal Kombat was going to be a cheese fest going in. Like, we want that. And as dumb as the superhero premise is, it's still got a lot of dumb fun, which is pretty refreshing and welcome in this age of movie serialization. As of this recording, the film sits at 55% on Rotten Tomatoes, but the reviews I've read share a lot of common traits. It feels like homework, it's a fake out, or it's just dull. My argument here is that this movie would feel more watchable if the fight scenes carried more weight and the dialogues felt less like homework. Probably solely in order to set up a sequel, the Mortal Kombat tournament was only teased in this film, but it's that very premise that has been enough justification in itself to involve us all from day one in this franchise. It's a literal struggle for the fate of the world, played out in one-on-one duels. It couldn't be more straightforward or easy to understand. But by nixing it for this script and pushing the tournament off into the future, it made the job of loading the action with meaning far harder than it needed to be, and it took a ton of the fight out of the fighting in Mortal Kombat. But then again, I'm just a dude somewhere in middle America ranting into a corner in my room. What do you think? If it isn't obvious already, I have no idea what kind of videos I want to make yet, so they're all freaking different on this channel. This was super fun though, so drop a like for me and maybe subscribe if this is what you're into. Also, if we need to make a martial arts short for real and not just swing around on playground equipment for a couple of hours, let me know in the comments. Now I'm going to stop ranting and then go back to playing Mortal Kombat 11 and getting my ass kicked online by incredibly rude children. That was the crotchetiest thing that I have ever said.